Well, I just want to start with thanking you for inviting me to be here with you to do this. And I see us both as being the kind of guys that are always in tune with spirit anyway.
Yeah.
So I would just invite us to remember that as we share together and to recognize that God is present everywhere.
Absolutely.
And it's up to us to open ourselves to God at any moment. And so I do that and invite you to do the same.
Absolutely.
And that's my prayer for the moment.
All right. I'm going to keep that in the video because that was beautiful. This is Love and Surrender. I guess it's a video series. We talk about anything that's love and surrender. And the idea of the video series is to bring on not just friends, but people that I come across who kind of exude joy, love, and happiness in everything that they do. No matter what they do in life, no matter what vocation they have. Today, I'm so happy to have such a great friend here, Rob Simon. And this is certainly one of these people. He does a lot in schools. We work together in a program called Arts Partners, giving programs to the schools. But I see when he gives his programs at school, he brings that same joy and happiness to the kids. So everything he does is like, is a wonderful thing. And so I'm so happy, Rob, that you were here to share it with whoever may be watching this video, because I think however you came to do, or however you came to be the way that you are is so beautiful and so giving to the world. And I hope that that someone will see this and will bask in that glow of love and caring. And if the world could be more like you, Rob Simon, it'd be such a beautiful, wonderful thing. So I guess having you on here would it's just, I guess my question is, how do you get to be who you are? I mean, to be such a loving, kind soul and to share this with the world and you can share that however you want to. Okay. However you want to do that.
Well, I just want to first say that I'm honored by your esteem. Because if you can see those kinds of things in me, then I'm willing to accept that as your point of view, and to recognize that it's an effort that I make. I would say that it starts for me with having grown up in a family environment where love was the norm. I had parents and grandparents who were all about that in a variety of ways. And then my larger community was very much that too. The teachers I came in contact with, people at my church and so on. But like any other kid growing up, I certainly had my challenges, with peer relationships and that kind of thing. And there were some painful things along the way that all of us go through, with peer groups and all that kind of thing. And for a long time, I felt out of place because I feel like I came into the world wired for love and then had that nurtured in my family environment and so forth. But I know that I was around a lot of people who weren't necessarily wired that way or didn't know how to express apart from competition and those kinds of things, and it was difficult. But somehow I was fortunate enough along the way to have the right people come into my world at the right time to really nurture that in me and to keep it alive and strong long enough for me to say, hey, this is who I am and this is what I need to commit to, just love in the world. And so from kind of however that happened, I just kind of kept reaching out into the world to see where love was and what it was doing and how it was expressed and what it could accomplish and how it felt. Everything from budding romances to the agape love that we celebrate between us. And so it just grew from a seed, and I've kept nurturing it. It's the kind of thing that, like in a garden, if you pull out the weeds and you leave in the seeds you want and you give it the nurture that it needs, it tends to grow. Yeah. And so that's how it's been for me. And one of the things that's certainly true for me is I've certainly felt like when we're talking about love and at its essence, I don't think it really is love unless it's unconditional.
Right.
There are so many people who sell love short. They try to put it into a little box and make it fit. But love will never fit in anybody's box. And the way we could be most true to it is to be open to it. And that's where the surrender comes in.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
I was thinking, because I knew that you had invited me to come and we were going to do this. I was thinking about a metaphor that kind of works for me. It's like, at my house, I can turn on a faucet and put on a trickle of water and wash my hands, or I can fill a bathtub. But that water source is pretty much infinite. As long as I turn on a faucet, it's going to come through. So the question is, how much am I opening up to the water that's there, and for what reasons? And am I limiting it in any way? It's like, under normal circumstances, I don't use a lot of water. I try to take short showers. I drink water. I use it for cooking. I use it for washing, that kind of thing. But if my house is on fire, I'm gonna want to open up the biggest water spigot I can. When there's a fire hydrant just right on the corner from my house. But I think about that metaphorically as being, and just the water supply that we access every day is one thing. But this is a water planet, and there's more water on this planet than there is anything else. And it's almost infinite by comparison. If we compare our little bodies to the bodies of water that are on the earth, it's like no comparison. But if we compare ourselves spiritually in terms of the love that's in us, that source is so much greater than we can even imagine. And it's always a question of how big is our spigot, how big is the faucet that we turn on, and how much do we give ourselves permission to be open to what's out there. And it's infinite. The only thing that limits us is our own imagination for how we can be open to it, how we can surrender to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any particular practices that you have in order to keep open to it? Because I know you said it's by effort that we stay on this path, and that we keep open to it. I know that's not always easy at times, and sometimes it could even be the weather. Sometimes that can be debilitating to how we view the day. But every time that we work together, you're always able to be that open channel for that. So is there any sort of thinking, mindset, anything in particular that really helps you to bring that out and be so diligent and consistent? And because that's really the essence of it, is to not only to understand it, but to live it, and then to continue to live it, and not just forget the next day and you're like, oh, geez, So it's a continual reminder of it. So is there anything in particular that you practice in order to be mindful of it?
For me, I think it just starts with I set it as an intention, every single day, and just here's something that's kind of interesting for me. It's like, because I open myself up to spirit, things are always coming through. Sometimes things I expect, and sometimes things I have no idea that are coming or why they arrive. But not too very long ago, I can't say exactly when, because time just kind of does this thing all the time for me. But I had this inspiration that came to me, and I'm not even sure how it came. But it's based on four words. The four words are awareness, love, creativity, communication. And there's a narrative that goes with that says, what is in my awareness? What would love do about it? How can I use my creativity to do what love requires? And how does all of this shape my communication to myself and the rest of the world? I don't know where that came from, but it's a guiding light for me every single day. I have this practice that I do, and perhaps some of the people who are listening will be familiar with this. But there's a little book out now called The Miracle Morning by a guy named Hal Elrod. And the essence of what he talks about in the book, and he has a great way of storytelling about how he came to it and all that. I won't get into all of that right now, because he does that at the beginning of the book for anybody who wants to pick it up. But he basically asked himself, what could he do to take his life in the world to the highest possible level? He just meditated on that for a while for reasons that he had. Yeah. And then he decided there were basically 6 things that he needed to do in order to take his life and experience to the highest level possible. And So he asked himself, okay, if I'm going to do these 6 things, how am I going to get them done every day because I'm so busy? Does that sound familiar? So he went through all the possibilities of how he could work these 6 things into his day. And he finally settled on, the only way I'm going to get it done is if I get up an hour earlier each day than I normally would get up and do those things in that first hour. But then he said, but I hate mornings.
I understand that.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, you know. But he committed to it anyway. And he trained himself to be more in love with mornings. But basically what he committed to was these 6 things. And he has a mnemonic that he uses to, to help us remember what they are. He calls it his life savers, and the word savers, S-A-V-E-R-S, represents the 6 things. So the way he describes them is, the S is for silence, which is prayer and meditation. So that's part of the practice. The A is for affirmation, and that's the language of how we talk to ourselves and how we affirm the world and that kind of thing. The V is for visualization, and that's obviously how we picture the world, how we picture ourselves in the world, how we picture the things we're trying to accomplish, our goals, those kinds of things. The E is for exercise. The R is for reading, and of course that's reading to uplift us. And the last S is for scribing, which is journaling. So those are the 6 things that he committed to. And when he committed to them, people around him, his friends, said, man, what are you doing? And he said, what I'm doing is this. And he told them. And so they started practicing it. And at some point, somebody said, man, you need to write a book. So he did. And the result is pretty phenomenal. There's a whole community worldwide now that are Miracle Morning people. I think today for me was day number 892 since I started.
Oh, wow.
But I know that there are people who have been doing it much longer than I have. But that's part of my practice, and a big part of it is just that, that question every day is part of the mix of my affirmations and visualizations. What's in my awareness? What would love do about it? It's like if we could just learn to ask that question, because it's like one of the things I say is, it's like we're sitting here right now, and until I say what I'm about to say now, we're not thinking about homeless people. But now it's in our awareness. Now, sitting here in this space, there's not much we can do except maybe encourage somebody through this video program, But when we leave this space and we're out on the street, we may encounter a homeless person.
Right.
And if we do, that person is in our awareness. So then we can ask, so what would love do about that? If we just ask that question, the answers can be myriad, but asking it makes a difference. What would love do about it? What would love do about anything that's in our awareness? And if we ask that question, we will come up with an answer. And then the next thing for me is, it's like we don't give ourselves enough credit for being creative creatures.
Yeah.
And so when we ask, so how can I use my creativity to help do what love requires? We may think of something out of that we might have not normally thought of, and all of a sudden we're making a difference in that person's life. Maybe because we invite them to go for a meal, or we hand them a $5 bill, or we stop and visit with them for half an hour to see what their story is. I mean, who knows? But by asking the question, it makes a difference. And then all of that, I think, shapes our communication. So for me, keeping it alive is just setting an intention, and that's a part of every moment that I come to. Even sitting here with you, it's like, what's in my awareness? We're doing love and surrender.
Yeah.
for video, for people to perhaps benefit from, so that's in my awareness. So what would love do about it? Show up the best way I know how. And how can we be creative? I don't know. We'll figure it out as we go. But
that's the surrender right there. Yeah.
But it's all about communication. And, if we can put ourselves out there in a way that encourages people or invites people into conversation or helps people to grow or helps us to grow, all those things matter.
Yeah. This should have been at the beginning of the video, but tell us, can you tell a little bit more about what you do? Because I know you work in schools, and you do the Arts Partners thing, and you're also storytelling. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Just let him know about your kind of work, and of course he's a singer too, a whole myriad of things. So can you talk about what you're doing or what you want to do, or?
When people ask me what I do, the shortest answer I can give is I'm an edu-tainer. And I don't know who came up with that term, but it's a combination of education and entertainment. And that really kind of describes in a nutshell who I am and what I do. And there are deep roots for that. For example, my father graduated, or would have graduated from high school within a quarter of a year, but he dropped out of school before he graduated because he had a chance to travel and sing with a gospel group professionally.
Wow.
And so he asked permission to do that from his stepfather, and Grandpa said, "You go." And he never looked back. So music was so much a part of who he was, and that influence in my life. And my mother also sang, my grandmother sang, and I was around music a lot growing up. So that's a big part of who I am just by nature. And then there was a lot of nurture in the environment as well. So music's a big part of what I do. Storytelling is a big part of what I do because I've been so influenced by people's stories along the way. And I found myself collecting them in my own mind and heart because of the effect they had on me. And so when I had an opportunity to become a professional storyteller, all of a sudden these stories I collected or that I was continuing to collect could be useful to someone else. And whether they're from personal experience or from classic stories or whatever. But long story short, pretty much everything I do is some form of education and or entertainment, a lot of times the two together. And that helps me to be true to who I am. I'm a singer-songwriter, arranger, and yet I'm not really I'm not a studied musician. I'm just a gifted one. I've been given these things that I try to pass on to the world. And I have my limitations in that regard, but I also have my skills in that regard. And I just try to be true to what I have and then connect with people who have skills that I don't, So that's what I do. So whether it's, doing programs in schools or I've been connected to schools a lot in my life. My whole life really has been about education. I've loved learning. My mother used to tell stories about me as a little kid. It was clear that my core question was why. I always wanted to know the why behind things, And my mother, bless her heart, was so patient with that. It's like she really worked hard to answer my why questions to the best of my ability as a little kid growing up. And I continue to ask why questions. That's part of what shaped my theology, for example, because some of the things that I was taught early on about spirit and about God and Jesus and all of that in my background, it's like I had questions about that people didn't give me satisfactory answers for. So I set out to find my own, so that's been a part of it.
That's great. That's great. You were open to to so many answers and having the questions. It's like wanting to get to know God more. It's like is this all there is? It's like, I think in the Bible it says seeking his face, and that's part of asking the questions is like that too. Yeah.
Well, interestingly too, I'll mention this, and maybe we can reflect some of this into the space later on, but I was telling you earlier that recently I wound up writing a new song that actually started about, maybe 3 years ago, just inspired by the idea that God is too big for one religion. It's like when you think of an entity that is infinite in nature, no end to it at all. It's like, how do you put that in a box called Christianity, or how do you put that in a box called Buddhism or Taoism or Judaism or Islam? It's like, if God is infinite, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, you can't put that in a box. Yet people try to do it all the time. So we have a banner that hangs in one of our worship spaces at church that says God is too big for one religion. And has not been a new idea for me, but the environment that I'm in all the time nurtures that. So somewhere along the way I conceived of that would make a great song. So I kind of wrote most of what became a first verse, and then just parked it. It just didn't seem like the right time. But here lately, all of a sudden, it came up again because our new pastor is doing a series that she's calling God's Too Big. It's based on that idea that, we're to serve this infinite God that we need to not put in a box. And so when that came up, I thought, okay, that song probably needs to get off the shelf and see if it comes into reality. So it exists now. We debuted it at our church last Sunday, and
Awesome.
we're actually going to reprise it again this coming Sunday because it fits with the theme of what she's doing. So kind of a cool thing. That's how, like we were talking about earlier, it's like the environment that we're in sometimes will give us these gifts of inspiration that we just are responsible to and responsive to. And again, to me, that's what surrender is about. It's like, I didn't ask for that to come through, but there it was, and I didn't ask for her to do the series that she did or to title it what she did, but there it was. And it's like, I could say, yeah, well, maybe not me, that to do that. But it's kind of like, no, it's like I have an opportunity here to reflect something into the world that might be useful for people. And I don't know if people will appreciate it or not, but I have to be true to what's in me.
Absolutely.
The love that's in me says, give it your best shot and see what happens. So that's what I've done.
If it's, I'm the same way with music. If it's from a real place, it will connect with someone. It might not connect with everyone, as we know, as we've experienced doing music and art and all sorts of stuff. But if it's real, it will connect with someone, and it may not be now. It could be, 50, 100 years, who knows? But messages that are real are still real, whether it's past, present, or future. So that's the great way of looking at it.
I have to agree. It's one of those things where, I don't know, I don't even know. Writing's just always, I guess I can trace creative writing back to 4th grade for me, because that was, I can remember Mrs. Holloway was my 4th grade teacher, and she was the person responsible for introducing us as a class to the idea of poetry and writing poetry, So we kind of started to examine what poetry is, rhythm, rhyme, iambic pentameter, whatever, and then we were invited to create, and early on I was a little afraid of doing the rhyme because it's like that requires a little extra level of thought, So I started off with free verse, but eventually got to the place where, okay, I'm willing to try the rhyming as well, and the rhythmic lines and all of that. And so that's where it started for me in 4th grade, the creative writing piece, and it just kept getting nurtured by teachers along the way. And that's become such a part of who I am as a singer-songwriter. I'm writing lyrics all the time, or adjusting lyrics. It's like, what I was thinking about is, the song, Robert Palmer's song, Might As Well Face It, I'm Addicted to Love.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking, if I were to rewrite that for our purposes, I would probably say, let's see, how did I have it? You might as well surrender to the power of love, or something like that. Something along those lines would be a different way of thinking about it. Not that there's anything wrong with being addicted to love in a romantic sense or whatever. But it's like, there's some truth to, you might as well face it. You surrender to love, and it makes a difference when you open yourself to all that's out there. It's just amazing what can be channeled through you.
Yeah, and talking about being addicted to love on that level is the sense of joy and fulfillment and happiness that when you experience this higher form of love. And when I mean higher form of love, true love in the essence is a giving thing, as to where when we talk about love, which is a very convoluted definition in the English language, can be about taking or receiving. Oh, I love that car, let's get it, or something like that. It can be a desire thing, but love in the highest form is a purely giving thing. It's not about receiving at all. But in the end, love is a cyclical thing, so we receive as we give. So that was the beautiful thing about it. Where was I going with that? So
I am not sure.
I had a point to that, but that's okay.
Well, I know what you made me think of is I often, when I'm working with kids, I don't hesitate to talk with them about love. I have a friend, Tim Henry, who wrote a song years ago called "How Wonderful You Are," and it opens with a line that says, every one of us has a special gift for the world. The gift is the love we have in our hearts. And that's absolutely true. We all have it. The only question is, what will we do with it? And that's what I say to kids, And I say, and I usually will encourage them. I say, there are 2 things I think you ought to do with it for sure. I say, one is you ought to give it to yourself, and we'll talk more about that. And then I said the other is you ought to give it to everybody else, you know. And I do mean everybody, right? And so we get into talking about what that means. But I also will sometimes say to them, you know, there's really only one love. It's just
That's
a question of how we apply it. And I'll do this fun little thing with us. So how many of you love pizza? And there you shoot up, you know. So how many of you love your pets? How many of you eat your pets? What? You know? So you eat pizza, but you don't eat your pets, right? Same love, different application, you know.
Yeah.
So it gets them thinking about, so what is love, you know, and then I sometimes, you know, we'll go on with that and say, so how many of you love your parents, or how many of you love sleeping, or whatever, you know. So anyway, it's just one of those things, just if we start thinking about what love is and what love does and what love means, and the idea that it's limitless. You know, there's a biblical phrase, it's one of the shortest in the Bible, that says God is love. Which means the opposite is also true. Love is God, you know. And when we really start thinking of it that way, it's like it's amazing what we have access to. It's like, how big is our spigot? How big is our faucet? And what do we turn it on for? And where do we point the flow?
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Your group is the griots, the African storytellers, and I was so enthralled from what little research I've done from the African griots. The fact that storytelling and the music alone, the harp music, is just, you know, has been so inspirational to me too. How the thing I like about it, the griots thing was in the ancient times, was storytelling was a very healing thing, and it wasn't just, we think of stories today, but we don't think about how powerful the mythology of storytelling is, and on a spiritual level. So how has that ancient tradition of the griots inspired you as a storyteller, or what can you share about? Because I'm sure you know more about this than I would.
Well, that's a deep question. I
I guess so.
It is. You know, you know, well, one of the things is, you know, from the West African traditions is where we find the griots, and they've been around since before there was writing. And actually, in most, if not all, of our cultures, storytellers existed before there was writing. In fact, that's how we know a lot about the world that existed before people knew how to symbolize it in a way that could be interpreted in the written symbol, you know. So we understand from studies that we've done that griots of old, they were the keepers of the traditions, the customs, and the history of their tribes that they were part of. So if you went to sit with a griot, the griot could tell you stories about your mother, tell you stories about your father, tell you stories about your grandmother, your grandfather on both sides, your great-grandmother and your great-grandfather on both sides, and on back for a long, long way, because they had picked up those stories from the previous griots who remembered those stories. In the world we live in today, we don't have the same kind of access to the power of memory that people had before, because we don't have to. We now have a way of recording things in written words, in recorded words like these, whether it be video, audio. So we can and we do empty our minds of the need to memorize things. But before we had access to that kind of those kinds of technologies, before the Gutenberg Bible was created, because of the printing press and so forth, people had to remember things, you know, in order to hold them in their hearts and in their minds and their consciousness. And so the griots of old were a much different breed than those of us who try to model after them today. We still try to be responsible for the history and customs and traditions of the peoples that we're connected to. But the important thing to note is that with storytelling, everybody loves a story. And when a story is well told, we can see ourselves somehow in the story, or not see ourselves in the story. And from it, if we can learn something about how to show up in the world, that's where the power comes from. And so sometimes a story can can be very, very, very simple, very, very small, or it can be very convoluted. But regardless, if a person is engaged in it and they can see something through it, then that makes a difference. So I'm happy to be part of a group that's devoted to that, to the power of story and just sharing stories that can help people to grow in ways that they want to, or sometimes in ways that they don't.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful thing to be able to do, and I just try to be as true to being good at it as I can be.
Yeah, yeah, and so this is my chance to plug his group, the Griots. If you're around the Wichita area, but I don't know, you can be anywhere now with video and stuff. So check out the Griots.
Actually,
is there a website?
Yeah,
or?
WichitaGriots.org it is now, and Griot is GRIOTS. So WichitaGriots.org is the website, and that's a way to connect with the group and some of the things that we do, and then other groups through us. So
yeah. And what I also like is you have drums with, and you do drumming with the storytelling. So it might be storytelling, and then you move to drumming. And it was awesome to see you at like the River Festival, which I wish they would just have you guys all the time there, 24/7 griots, because it was just seeing kids come alive with these amazing stories. But the thing I liked about you that you said about the power of memory too was the fact that you would take information, it becomes a part of you, as to where now information can very much be an external thing. Mm-hmm. So it's not really a part of us. It's just something, well, I crammed this for a test or whatever, and then it kind of, but the fact that you really had to focus on something in order to get it memorized correctly, it kind of becomes a part of you. So information must have seemed very special back then. So I don't know. It was just a thought I had while you were saying it.
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and it's interesting too that there are programs out right now that are designed to help people increase their memory power, and so teachers will introduce things like mnemonics or visualizing. Like I once memorized all of 50 states in alphabetical order, based on this technique of creating a picture for each state and then putting those pictures in a parade in my mind. If I were to go back and review it, I could probably do it again, but it's like I don't need to remember that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it demonstrated the power of being able to do that just by applying yourself in a certain way. So yes, storytellers of old were a different breed than storytellers of today, and yet storytellers of today do a lot of the same kinds of things that the storytellers of old used to do in order to remember stories. Basically, if you can see the pictures in your mind, you can retell it again and again.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that works.
That's awesome. And the other thing with his group, the Griots, I mentioned the drumming too, and he brought this amazing drum today. What kind of drum is this? And we might have to if we can lift it up to show everyone here. This is a very cool. You don't really see these at a guitar center. So
yeah, this is I don't know. There's so many stories to tell, but as a kid growing up, we had these classic desks that we sat in at school that had the little the desktop here, and a place you could slide in on the side, and then underneath you was basically a box open up on one side. That's where you put your books. The other side was closed, the front was closed, the back was closed. Well, we discovered pretty early on that they made great drums. So kids like me were just beating on these vests all the time. The teacher said, "You gotta stop beating on those drums," right? But that was how I trained my hands to create things I was hearing in my environment. Like the high school band in my town was excellent, and the drum line was phenomenal. So the rhythms that they would come up with, everybody was always trying to imitate those rhythms. So we did it all the time, beating on our desks. But I never saw myself being a percussionist, and I still, in some ways, don't. But because I've trained my hands to kind of mimic things that I hear, then when I hear things that I like, I try to do that. So anyway, long story short, I was in Eureka Springs, Arkansas one time. My wife and I would like to visit there,
Yeah.
And so we were going up and down the streets, checking out the shops, and we passed by a shop that had a nice window display, and inside that window from the street you could see 3 drums. This was one of them. And so I go, oh, cool drums, So I go inside the shop, and from the other side of the display, you could actually reach in and grab the drums. So I reached in and I grabbed this one, and I just kind of hit it, and it's like, and at that time, this one's been sitting for a while, and the head's really tight. But if I play it for a while, the voice changes,
Yeah.
And it's also been reheaded at least once since I've had it. But when I first struck it, it just boom, big sound, And I'm like, wow, that's cool. So I just took it off and I just started. Just kind of goofing around. And then another guy came in, he picked up a drum and sat down, and we just kind of started so just doing stuff like that. And I just fell in love with it, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. So I looked down and saw a price tag, and I'm like, ooh. So I said, I don't know about that, and I kind of put it back there. But I couldn't, as we went on with our little tour of the area, I couldn't get it out of my mind. Yeah. And so I went back and I dropped my plastic on the counter and I took it home. So this was the first drum that I ever owned, and I now have 3 that are similar to this, and this one is kind of has an honored place. I don't play it a lot because the one that's most recent to my collection is larger, and it has more range across the top of its head. So I play it more because I use it with the griots. I also use it with my band that I'm part of too. But it's just fun, and then there's so many things that. I'm not, a studied musician. I'm just one that has gifts, and I try to learn from what is in my environment. So, you learn things like when you strike a drum like this in the middle, that's where you're going to get the biggest, fullest sound. But when you strike it on the edge, you get different kinds of sounds. Yeah. And then in between, so you've got all kinds of range there. And when you can play around with the drum head, you can make it sing a little bit, So when you mix all that up, it just gets kind of interesting. And then striking it and leaving your hand there is different than pulling your hand away, So you just kind of start to experiment with possibilities, There's so many possibilities,
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, this was a real gift for me to find this drum and to have a chance to live with it and to mess around with it, and then to mimic some of the things that I've heard. Like one of the most fun things I get to do is with my band, we do a cover of Paul Simon's song "Late in the Evening."
Oh, nice!
And it's a great rhythmic song, and it's the most fun I get to have playing drums with my band. It's like there's a rhythm that kind of goes. So if you ever hear this, like it was late in the evening. So it's like, the drummer and I just kind of light up when we get to play that song because it'll work you hard, but it's one of those things where it's a lot of fun to play. So.
Oh man.
So anyway, that's how one of the ways that music has come to me. And the other thing, I'll just mention, so we're talking about music is. I grew up. My favorite singing group all time is the Temptations.
Oh yeah,
for a lot of reasons. I mean, people
understood.
People who don't know, they just don't know how iconic they were, both in terms of, the way they brought harmony into the environment of popular music in ways that hadn't been done before. Dance steps were phenomenal. Yeah. Costuming was phenomenal. There was just a lot to love about that group. But I would listen to their music, and I would pick up every part that they were doing, and then I would sing all the parts. I couldn't do it bass like Melvin. Yeah. but I knew what he was doing. But all the other voices, I know you want to leave me, or just my imagination. I just did all those things, and I figured out the harmonies. And so it's like given an opportunity to sing, I could, if you want me to sing that, yeah, I can sing that. You want me to sing, yeah, I can sing that because I could hear it in my head, And I didn't realize how much that was going to come in handy for me when I started hearing music in my own head and finding ways to translate that for people. or being a part of a band for the first time the summer after I graduated from high school gave me a chance to kind of say, okay, here's what I hear on the radio, and I understand what that is, and I can help my group recreate that same sound. So it was just a gift to be able to do that, but it came from a lot of listening and a lot of experimenting.
Yeah, awesome. Wow. Well, on the subject of hearing and putting it forward, you want to try playing something together?
Sure.
It's kind of
Let's just
something for the listener, viewer. A little bit of usually. Whoa, we end in a little musical. I guess a musical prayer, a little musical surrendering, and that's what we're going to do right now. Is just have something that's very surrendering. Just so we're just going to kind of go with the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Oh, is there anything else you would like to share? It could be about anything.
I guess I would just say, it's an honor to be putting this out in a way that might be useful to people. Trevor doesn't know. I don't know who will tune into this when they might see this conversation, how much they might have time to listen. We don't know who you are watching right now, I guess I should say. But if you're here and you're finding something of value here, then that means our time was well spent. If you pass through and you say, not for me, that's okay too. But I think the important thing is if there's any value for you here in this conversation about love, about surrender, about God, about religion, whatever, pass it on to whomever might benefit from it as well, or ask more questions, or if there's a way to get in touch with us through this process, reach out to us. We're willing to respond. And of course we're not. I'm not the only person who's been guested here. So for any of us, it's kind of like we're just doing the best we can as human beings, which is all any of us can ever do. So with that said, I think that's all I would want to add. Just thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing whatever time you've shared.
Absolutely. Well, we'll take a brief moment of silence, and we'll just play something. And this is especially for the viewer or listener. We don't have a title for this. We're just going with the moment. So if you have an idea for a title with it, send it our way. It's your song. So.